let's make a custom recipe type for our block entity. Forging Fabric courses with advanced topics such as entities, custom structures, and 3D armor models linked in the description below. Alright, we found ourselves back in IntelliJ once more, and in this tutorial we're going to be adding a custom recipe type. So this will include reading in a JSON file, and that JSON file is basically representing the recipe for our custom block entity. So what are we going to need for this? Well, first of all, in the tutorial mod package, right-click new package called recipe. And inside of there, we're going to make two new classes. One of them is going to be the gem cutting station recipe, and the other one is going to be the mod recipes class. And let's start with the gem cutting station recipe. So this is going to implement the recipe interface right here with the simple container as basically here its type, and then we're going to hover over this, implement methods. You can see quite a few methods there, and that is pretty much all that we need. We actually need to do a lot of modifications in this class. Now what I will do is I will actually be copying over sort of piece by piece the actual methods. All of this is of course available to you in the description below, GitHub repository and individual gist as well. So the first thing we'll need are the three fields. So the fields here are a resource location ID, an item stack output, and a non-null list of ingredients called recipe items. And then we'll also need the constructor right here. There you go. We can see this is just the same name, of course, and then just passing in the ID, the output, and the recipe types, and then setting them accordingly. The matches method we're going to ignore for a moment, and we're going to do all of the rest, and then at the end we're going to look at the matches method, because this is actually the most important method that we have, because this determines whether or not our actual recipe matches with what is inside of the container. But we're going to see that in just a moment. The assemble method should just return the actual output. So we can just do this. Craft in dimensions should just return true. The result item should, crazily enough, return output.copy, actually. Very important here. And then here, the ID is just ID. And then the serializer and the type are special things for which we actually need custom classes. So the type class is actually fairly straightforward. I'm going to copy that over. You can see it's just a static class type, and it just implements the recipe type of this particular station recipe here. And you can see we're just saving the instance here and the ID right here. So here inside of the get type method, we're just going to return type.instance, and that is pretty much all that we need to do here. The serializer is a little more complicated and is a little bit of a longer class here, but I'm going to copy it over as well. And we're going to basically see what all of this means. So we can see that the serializer class right here implements the recipe serializer, once again, of gem cutting station recipe. Very important here is that the ID given here, this name right here, has to be the name, or is the name that we're going to define inside of the JSON file in a few moments when we actually say what type this basically is. Right, then we have three interesting methods that are the from JSON, from network, and to network. We're going to ignore those for a moment and just look at the rest here. This is just some craziness that we need, you see need repr because generics. I am honestly not 100% sure why we need this. We just need it. Just put it in there. Don't worry about it. The registry name is just the ID, and then the registry name here is just the instance. So we're just returning the same instance here. Right, and then to the three interesting methods. So the three methods, the from JSON, from network, and from to network. First of all, the from network and to network. Well, basically, we're writing the actual recipe to the network, and here we're getting the recipe from the network. What's very important here is that when we're writing it, you can see the first thing we're writing is inside of the buffer right here. We're writing in the size of the ingredient list, so basically how many ingredients are in there. Then we're looping through all of their ingredients and writing each ingredient once again into the actual buffer. And then here at the very end, we're writing the actual result item into the buffer as well. And that order has to be the same order that you actually read it out from. So this friendly buffer and this friendly buffer, you can think of them as the same. And we're going through this first and then this second, so to speak. So you can see the first thing we're reading from the buffer is an integer, which is of course exactly right because we're writing an integer first, then we're reading it. Makes perfect sense. And then we're looping through exactly that many steps as well. And then reading in, again, ingredient from network buffer. So we're reading in the ingredients and exactly how many ingredients we have written in here. So those two match exactly this. And then you can see buffer read item is the last thing where we exactly read the item, the output here. And then we're creating a new gem cutting station recipe. So that's the general idea here. Those two methods have to match. Otherwise, the mod will actually not work properly when you try to join the server or if you try to use the mod outside of your dev environment. So that's very important here that you make sure that this matches. If you have to have any modifications done there, then those would be done right here. And then there is the from JSON method, which you can see basically just reads the JSON file. And this basically, well, it takes a look at, there's a member output. Okay, then we're getting an item stack from that output. And we also have an array. This is the ingredient array. In our case, this is actually only of size 1 because we're only going to have one ingredient here. But I basically kept it as a list because, sometimes you actually require maybe 2 different inputs, so 2 different ingredients to, well, create a recipe. And that is why I kept it. And then you would change it right here. This size does not have to match the size of how many slots you have because, of course, the ingredients here, this list of ingredients, these are the inputs, right? Obviously, even if you have 4 slots, one of them is going to be the result slot. So obviously, even then, this would not match. So just to make that clear so that you don't confuse those 2 numbers here, right? This is just how many ingredients are read in from the JSON file. And then in the serializer right here, we're just going to do the following. Serializer.instance, and there we go, and that should be that as well. And then last but not least, we can take a look at the matches method. Now this is going to return the following. I'm going to show you this. So it's going to return recipe items get 0. This will return the first recipe item that was read in from the ingredient list from the JSON file, and then it's going to test it with the container. So this would be our block entity, and we're going to get the item of index 1. Now, if we actually take a look at the block entity one more time, or actually we can take a look at the menu, that's even better. We can think about this like this, right? Index 1 right here. So it would look at this particular slot right there. Look what is in there. And when we think back, right, in our slot 1, what we wanted in there is raw citri. So in our case, the water is actually hard-coded as well as the gem cutter tools. So those 2 are basically hard-coded, quote unquote, and the only thing that we basically want as a recipe is one particular item. This is why we're basically only looking for one item here to match, and then we will have a recipe that is valid. That is the general idea. So the matches method, if that returns true, then we have a valid recipe. Right, so let's move on to the mod recipes class, and let's actually register our serializer in this case. So this is a public static final deferred register, this time of type recipe serializer. Of type question mark serializers, which is equal to a deferred register dot create forge registries dot recipe serializers comma tutorial mod dot mod id. And where there is a deferred register, of course, there is a public static void register method with an I event bus called event bus, and then serializers dot register passing in the event bus, and there you go. Let's not forget to call this in our constructor right here, tutorial mod class. So this is going to be mod recipes.register and then passing in the event bus, and there you go. Now let's get the public static final registry object of type recipe serializer of type gem cutting recipe. Very important here. So this is going to be the gem underscore cutting underscore, let's go serializer. There we go. And this is equal to the serializers.register, of course, gem underscore cutting, that's going to be fine, gem cutting, and then a supplier of the gem cutting recipe.serializer.instance. And now this is very important. We also need to go into our event package, mod event bus events. So if you don't have this, then you need to create this. And here we're going to need a new method I will copy over, and you're going to see this is the register recipe types right here. And in the registry event recipe serializers, we want to register this under, well, pretty much like this. So the gem cutting station recipe ID here, and then here the type instance. That's kind of important. If you don't have this, then it's not going to work. Right, once we have added this, now the actual serialization is, well, basically in-game, and the JSON file would be serialized. However, of course, we're not doing anything inside of our block entity. And for that, we actually need to modify this quite significantly. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy over most of this, or pretty much everything that we're going to need here, and I will explain. So the first thing we're going to do is at the very top, we're going to add 3 different fields. So this is going to be the container data as well as the progress and the max progress. So this is going to determine how much progress has been made inside of the with crafting this recipe. So this would be corollary for this is basically the arrow inside of, for example, the furnace, and this is what this represents. So this is the current progress, and this is the max progress. So as soon as progress has reached max progress, we're basically done. That is the general idea. And then we need this container data. That is kind of weird, yes. And what we're going to do is we're going to assign this inside of the constructor right here. I'm going to copy this over as well. So let's just copy it right here. And once again, of course, everything here is available to you in the description below, GitHub repository and individual gist as well. And then you can see we basically make some new container data and then passing in the progress and the max progress under the indices 0 and 1 here. The count, of course, has to be exactly how many different fields or how many different variables we're saving. And this is pretty much boilerplate as well. However many, well, basically data you want to save, you can put in here. Now, the reason why we have to do this is because these fields are actually only saved on the server, and we need to get them to the client. Meaning in our screen here, this is client only. And to actually be able to use this, right, we have to somehow synchronize them from the server to the client and from the client to the server. Therefore, we need this container data then passed in through the menu to the screen. That is the general idea here, and that is why we need to do this. What we also want to do is we want to pass this right here to the actual menu. So this.data. Now this is going to be an error, but we're going to fix that in just a moment. Let's actually finish the rest of the block entity here, and then we're going to fix that in the menu as well. So in the save additional right here, of course, what we would want is we want to save the progress as well. So let's just add this. You can see we're just putting in the integer progress right here under gem_cutting_station.progress, and then under the load method, we're reading this out once again. This is, of course, just to save the progress, basically. Should be fairly self-explanatory. And now we're going to basically delete all of the methods that we have here and replace them with some other methods. Now, this is going to be quite a lot of methods. So we want basically everything from the tick method all the way to, once again, can insert amount into output slot method. Once again, you can copy this over as well. Now, once we copy this over, we should get no additional errors. There are one error there because should be gem cutter tools. There you go. So there should be no errors present at this time. And what we'll see is we still have the tick method, but it has become a lot more complicated. So basically, we're still asking for a recipe, and then we're increasing the progress. So as long as the block entity has a recipe present inside of the inventory, we're going to increase the progress. And as soon as progress is bigger than our max progress, then we're going to craft the item. So this is basically going to make it so that we're going to, well, increase the progress every tick, and at some point we're going to craft the item. So we're no longer crafting the item every tick, we're only going to craft it every max progress amount of ticks, basically. The has recipes method has also changed quite significantly. You can see we're basically filling a simple container with all of our slots right here. So this is just some boilerplate code that we're doing here. And then we're asking the actual recipe manager, hey, is there a recipe present for this particular inventory? So we're basically saying, okay, look at the inventory of the block entity. Is there a recipe present that is under the gem cutting station recipe, namespace, so to speak? And if that is present, that's great. Then basically the first Boolean here is true. And then all of the other Booleans have to also be true. So once again, can insert amount into output slot. This is at the very bottom here. So we're just checking, okay, if we were to, add something to it, would this actually be more than the stack size? If that is the case, then we would not add it, basically. And then also can insert item into output slot basically checks whether or not the actual item inside of the output slot is already the item we're trying to put in as well, or if the output slot is empty. That is the general idea here. So nothing too crazy right there. So those would be this one and this one. And then we also checking has water in water slot. So we're just checking once again if in the first slot we have water, and then we're also checking whether or not the tools are in the tool slot. So that is pretty much all we're doing right here, and then we're crafting the item. Once again, for the crafting the item, I'm actually checking once again if the recipe is present just in case, and if that is the case, then we're going to extract the item from slot 0, we're going to extract the item from slot 1, we're going to herd once again the gem cutter tools, and then we're just increasing how many items are in the output slot, but this time we're actually getting the actual result slot right here of the item, and then we're resetting the progress once again. That is the general idea here. And then what we can also see is if we don't have a recipe right here, we're continuously resetting the progress just in case, so that if you take something out, it doesn't just stop there at the progress, but it actually resets it as well. Those are pretty much the modifications done for the tick method, and that is pretty much also, kind of what you need to do if you add the custom recipe types here. And then let's actually go into the station right here. So for this data, this is of course going to display the progress arrow in just a moment. So let's go into the menu and actually fix the particular error here. So we actually are expecting now a new parameter right here, and that is going to be the container data. And we're just going to call this data. And then we're going to get an error right here. No worries at all. We're just going to add the following new simple container data, and then passing in however many data items or, the pieces of data we're going to add. So this is once again the same as this one right here. So the count right here has to match this one right here. Make sure that you have this right. Otherwise you will get an error. We also want to save this in a variable. So private final container data called data. And then after the level here, we're just going to say this.data is equal to data. So we're basically setting this particular field here to this particular data parameter. And then incredibly important, do not forget this, we want to add data slots right here and then pass in the data. So this is really important that we have this, otherwise it's not going to be synchronized. We are also going to add 2 new methods here, and I will just copy them over once again, everything here available to you. And we're basically just checking, okay, is the first data variable here bigger than 0? Then we know we are currently crafting. And then we're getting the scaled progress. So this is just a bunch of, interesting math basically to show, okay, how far along are we on crafting process? And then we're just, having a bunch of math here to basically get it scaled. So our progress arrow size is 26 pixels in this case. And then we're just basically making sure, okay, if we're 50% done, then we're going to output basically 13, because then what we want to do is we want to get 13 pixels of that arrow displayed. That is the general idea. Hopefully that should be understandable. It pretty much is just a bunch of math, so nothing too crazy. And then what we are going to do in the screen is then we're going to draw this. So I'm once again going to copy this over, and I'm going to try to explain, because this is most of the time one of the parts that is a little confusing to quite a few people. Understandably so, by the way, because the BLIT calls can be quite complicated. So you're going to say, what are all those numbers? What do they mean? What the frick is all of this? Don't worry, we're going to get through this. So what we're going to do is we're going to open the GUI, and here we have it. So let's think about this. What do we want to do with this? Well, what we want to do with this is, of course, we want to draw this particular arrow, right, onto this particular arrow. Okay, that's our goal. And why are those numbers basically here? Well, let's think about this. 102 and 41. What does that mean? Well, 102 just means, 102 pixels to the right and then 41 pixels down. Once again, we're starting here, right? So 102 pixels to the right and 41 down is about right here and then about right here. So right here is our 102 and 41. So this means that the first 2 parameters, so to speak, so our x and our y, plus how many pixels we basically want to be from the top left corner of your GUI, right? This is where your new image is going to be drawn. Okay, so let's just think about this. We're going to draw from right here, right about, let's say, right about here. Okay, then let's think about what is 176 and 0. What is that, right? That's the offset. U offset, Y offset. What does that mean? Well, this basically determines from where you take the image that you want to be drawn. Because we're saying, okay, we want to draw right here, but what do we want to draw? Well, we want to draw something from 0, so Y0, right? And then X 176, right? That was 176, yeah. So we basically want to start drawing from here. And then we have to define what is the size of the image that we want to draw. And you can see the width is 8, so that means that the width here is going to be 8 pixels, okay. And then what is the height? The height is the scaled progress that we get from the menu. Meaning that the more crafting progress we have, the more of this arrow is going to be displayed until we basically have displayed the entire arrow, and then we're done crafting. Then the progress is going to be 0 again, meaning that after that, the arrow is going to be basically not drawn anymore. So this is what those numbers mean. They can be quite complicated. However, once again, I highly suggest just being open to experimentation on this as well, trying out a bunch of stuff, trying out some other numbers, and then hopefully you're also going to get a little bit more of an intuitive feel for it. Usually they are not that crazy when you really think about it, what each of these different things are. I had a difficult time in the beginning with the BLIT as well, but if you actually think about it, then afterwards it should be fairly self-explanatory, all things considered. Right, now the last thing that we need to do is add the recipe. So let's add the recipe as well in the tutorial mode recipes right here. So let's just copy it over. I'm going to copy this over. This is the citrine from the gem cutting station. And you can see this is the type right here. This is the type that we've defined. Then we're basically saying, okay, if we put in a raw citrine right here, we're going to get as an output a normal citrine. That is pretty much all that we're saying here. And now everything should be working totally fine, exactly how you would expect it to. And that's actually, the entire process of this. It can get quite complicated, and also I've sort of mixed the custom recipe serialization a little bit with the showing the progress right here, but that is pretty much going to be fine. So I guess for completion's sake, let's see if it works. All right, found ourselves back in Minecraft, so let's just put everything into place and let's see if we can start seeing a progress arrow. And there we go, we get the progress arrow, and after it's done, there we go. Everything works exactly how you would expect it to. Let's add another piece of water here, another water bottle, and there you go. And then there's another one, and it should also just add it to it. There you go, 2 of them. So everything working exactly how you'd expect it to, showing the progress, doing everything that we wanted to do, and crafting the correct item. That's really freaking awesome. Just like this, you can basically make your own custom recipes for this particular block entity. And as I've said, you can always modify the recipe as well to basically include some other things, multiple different inputs, whatever. This is just, this is basically a canvas on which you can draw and just change it up however you need to or however you'd like. But for the time being, this is it for this tutorial right here. I hope you found this useful and you learned something new. If you did, I would very much appreciate a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more tutorials just like this one. I also want to thank all of my lovely Patreon supporters for supporting me and this channel. It is very much appreciated, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. So, yeah.